I didn't know that like we're going to Michelle Obama. Months later, I get at our office, in the mail, I get this envelope that says, has a seal like the office of Barack Obama. And it's like one of those things that you think is like a scam.
Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Sashee Chandran. She's the founder CEO of Tea Drops, a tea company, which she'll explain how unique this tea is. But this year she'll be doing 7 million tea drops. She's raised $3.5 million from venture capitalists. Her tea is sold in over 1,500 retailers nationwide, including Whole Foods, Neiman Marcus, and Costco. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Peck. I'm excited.
Yeah. So tell us about Tea Drops. What makes Tea Drops special? What's different compared to kind of your usual tea?
Yeah, the main uniqueness of Tea Drops is in the form factor. So our teas, instead of being in bags or a loose leaf tea, they are bagless teas that essentially dissolve in hot water. Imagine a bath bomb, and throwing the bath bomb in water, the tea itself dissolves. It's made of whole leaf, loose leaf tea. So you have some ground tea that sits at the bottom of your cup, but it doesn't interfere with the drinking experience. So I call it a bath bomb, except it's actual tea.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that you've had some amazing people try out your tea and love your tea, some public personas, including Chrissy Teigen, Michelle Obama, Tory Burch.
Mm-hmm.
That's just amazing. We're going to dig into how you got all that. Tell us a bit about your background and your heritage and where you grew up.
Yeah, so my cultural background is I grew up in Southern California. Both of my parents are immigrants. My mom is Chinese and my dad's from Sri Lanka. So my dad was actually born on a tea estate in Sri Lanka, which I didn't find out until actually only like 3 or 4 years ago. And
you're like tea royalty.
I know. I was like, Dad, how did you forget to mention this small detail? So, I come from two cultures that are very rich in tea history. In fact, at one time, Sri Lanka was one of the largest producers of tea in the world. So has China. China was also a large producer of tea. So having that influence of both of those cultures, I think really inspired my love for this beverage very early on, because I associate tea with a lot of just warm memories growing up of having tea time with my mom or having tea time with my grandma on my dad's side. So that was a big influence for me growing up. And both my parents are immigrants. My mom came here when she was 8 years old to Massachusetts, and my dad came to pursue his MBA at UCLA when he was 28. In fact, both my parents met at UCLA. So very much the classic immigrant story. They, really didn't have much money to their name when they first came here, just worked really, really hard. And were really like some of the first set of entrepreneurs that I ever was exposed to.
What kind of food did you grow up with? Was it more Chinese or Sri Lankan or both?
I would say it's a fusion. I have to give a lot of credit to my mom. So my mom actually grew up in the Chinese restaurant business. Her family had a Chinese restaurant in Fall River, Massachusetts. That's where she grew up. So she knew from 8 years old, she was working in the kitchen. And
wow.
So she's a really amazing cook. Cooks a lot of amazing Chinese dishes. But, being married to my dad, she's always been fascinated by food in general, all types of food. So she took it upon herself to really learn how to make very classic Sri Lankan and South Indian dishes, from dal to different types of curries. So we really had a fusion of both Chinese dishes and Sri Lankan dishes, and even like a mixed Chinese, Indian, Sri Lankan hodgepodge of food growing up, which was really exciting and delicious.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. I think, for example, Thai cuisine, Thai, is a fusion or a blend of South Asian culture and the Chinese and the Vietnamese who kind of migrated downward. So I can see maybe your household maybe had some very similar flavors there.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of. My mom's Southern China, so it's very different than Northern Chinese food in that it's actually a lot more. It's my mom says it's more subtle in a sense and a lot more plain, she says, than Northern Chinese, but which is true. Like you have the kanjis and which is kind of a rice porch. So that was what we had a lot growing up. But on my dad's side, it's so flavorful. I don't know if you've had Sri Lankan food or South Indian food, but it's just so bold. Like there's a
Hmm.
certain shrimp curry. My mom makes a Sri Lankan shrimp curry that's just bold, flavorful, one of my personal favorite dishes. And so that contrast is very interesting. But the fusion together is very unique, and it's something you take for granted, right? Growing up in a multicultural household, but it's some of my favorite memories, and also something that, I think that's why food is such a huge part of my life, and what I look forward to is because I had that intersection of cultures growing up.
Was tea a big part of growing up in your household?
It was for me. And I mentioned earlier that for me, tea is associated with a lot of warm memories growing up, and both on my mom and my dad's side. So for my mom, she would always have Chinese herbal teas around. And I remember when I was 6, she would make a certain type of chrysanthemum tea, like a Chinese flower tea with Chinese rock candy that I used to love. And then, a lot of green teas, jasmine tea was a favorite of ours. We would have it with like chocolate chip cookies. So that was some of my favorite memories. And just honestly, it was a time for me to bond with my mom and connect with her. So I have memories of that. And then on my dad's side, my grandma used to always have us over most Sundays, every weekend. And so after our meal, she would cook us this amazing Sri Lankan lunch. And then a few hours later, we would all, have a nap. We would get up, and she would make a really strong Sri Lankan black tea with milk. So, and then we would have, usually cookies or something with that. So those are the type of memories I have on both sides. And tea was always served, at every family function.
Yeah.
So you can imagine there's a lot of warm, great memories that are associated with tea. And I think that's partly why I gravitated to the beverage from an early age.
Yeah. How did you come across the idea in the beginning? Because when I first met you, I think you were still working at eBay and you were working in the tech industry in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. So this is quite a departure
Yes,
from what you were
definitely
doing.
a departure. I think because I was always drawn to tea, I would go and have afternoon tea at different places, and was fascinated just by the industry itself, and that I just also felt it was so archaic that the tea industry itself, it just felt like it needed some kind of revival, even though I couldn't articulate it at that time. So Tea Drops was really born out of my own personal frustration with trying to make tea at my work desk at eBay, because I would have an arsenal of different equipment on my desk, from a kettle to a strainer to the actual tea leaves. And then you would have to brew that tea. So I'm sure if you've made loose leaf tea before, you know that you have to add the hot water. First, you have to boil the hot water. You have to add it to the tea leaves. Then you have to steep it for 5 to 7 minutes. And by the time I would make my tea, there would be time to run to my next meeting. So I couldn't even sit there and enjoy it. And then bag teas, we used to have bag teas at the break room, but they were always like, these very low quality bag tea options that, usually tea bags are made with what's referred to as tea dust. It's the last part of tea harvesting and production. So it's never as flavorful or aromatic as true loose leaf tea. And that's something that I noticed early on. So there was no great option, right? If you're kind of on the go and you want a quick but high quality cup of tea. So that kind of just inspired me to start experimenting with different tea blends at the time in my apartment kitchen. And I was just probably at the time that you met me, is when I was kind of experimenting, making this my home kitchen, just like having friends and family try it. And one thing led to the next. And I eventually developed this notion of a tea drop, which I eventually called it, which is, a tea that's compressed into a fun shape, like a heart star and flower, and ended up researching what it would require to patent the idea, and ended up going that route of writing my own patent for it, submitting it to the USPTO, and then eventually starting to sell it at farmers markets and different artist shows.
What was that process like? No, most people don't think to patent their ideas, especially in tech, because tech moves so fast. But so
Yeah.
you have a patent for your tea drops.
Yeah, I have a patent, and it's a utility patent for the process of how tea drops are made. And it was a long process, I think, post actually submitting the provisional patent. But the idea came because I was debating whether, if I actually even had any IP around this idea, but I ended up going to a local business resource center called SCORE. And I forgot what the acronym stands for, but it's literally just like, it's like not a range of successful retired professionals who just want to donate their time and volunteer and help emerging business owners. So I went there one day and there was a retired attorney. I think he was a patent attorney, and he ended up meeting with me, and I told him, the product I developed, I think got a sample with me. And he's like, I think you actually do have something you can protect currently here. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, well, what would it cost? What's involved in actually patenting idea? And he's like, well, you should probably have like 15 to 20,000 on hand.
Yeah.
And at that time, I'm like, spending that amount of money on any
It's a
legal,
car.
I know. I'm just like, are you kidding me? No, there's no way. So I think he could see like I was terrified at the idea of that. And he proposed, well, if you write your own patent, then I can review it and you can then submit it on the USPTO site yourself. Anyone can go on the USPTO site and submit their own patent. And so I spent the next 2 weekends researching all the patents related to tea on the USPTO site, kind of looked at like the format of how to write a patent, how to develop, because you have to submit drawings and like all of this other attachments. And so I ended up going back to him and he reviewed. He's like, okay, this looks decent enough to submit. And then they submit the provisional. The provisional gives you 1 year to really like test out the idea, make any refinements so that after that year, you can then submit an actual patent, which I ended up doing.
Got it. Where was that in the journey? Were you at that point more convinced you were all in yet, or were you still investigating?
I was, it's hard when you make the verbal commitment that I'm in, or even mental commitment, because the mind is such that it's always afraid of failing. It's always afraid. It's like it always does what it needs to do to protect the ego. And so in that sense, I never admitted to myself that this was going to be a full-time business until like I made the decision to leave eBay. And so at that point, I think I was still, I don't remember exactly where I was in the journey, but I think I still had that mindset that, well, maybe if this doesn't work out, that's okay. I would have just explored the path. So I think it's when I left I left my job, and even then I wasn't convinced. Really, like 6 months after that I was like, okay.
And it finally hit. Yeah,
like this is what I'm doing. I've been doing this day in and day out,
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So that was when you finally kind of mentally had the conviction. Yeah. How long did you end up bootstrapping this? Because I know you've raised 3.5 million, but how long were you doing before that? Before you had funding?
Yeah, so I want to say it was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years even, and it was a really scary moment to even like decide to raise money because of the implications that it has. And I think every founder goes through thinking about what is the type of business I want to have. And you might not even know, like, I don't think I even knew the type of business I wanted to have in the beginning, but I actually spent like close to 1 year debating. At the time I was just using my own savings. I took a line of credit on my house and I was using some of that too. So
yeah, that was going to be my next question. It's like, how did you bootstrap it and where was the income coming from?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was like I was deciding to do an MBA at the time. Like I'd already taken my GMAT. I'd gone into a school nearby, so I was planning on working and doing a nighttime MBA. So the money I would have used towards the MBA, I just kind of like shifted that to be my startup money.
Yeah. Once you had the idea for Tea Drop, was it? Obviously you're very successful now, and it's in a lot of stores, and it's I imagine a different scale. I mean, one way this could have played out is you could have still been at eBay, and this could be sort of like maybe like a little Etsy store that made you money on the side, right? Like what I guess what gave you the conviction that like this is a big idea that it needs to go big?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, in hindsight's always 2020. I just knew that as a tea drinker myself, this was an obvious invention. Like, this was something I'm like, how does this not exist in the world? And that's the only reason why I pursued it, that seriously, because I just knew once I got past that initial hurdles, and not necessarily the hurdle stop, but like just proving it out as a concept, I felt like this could be something big. This could be game changing for the category itself.
Yeah.
So I think it was just an inner conviction of knowing that this could be something, and it's like on me to either move it forward or mess it up.
Yeah. When did you decide to fundraise?
So after a year, I would say a year after I quit my job, I started thinking about how I'm going to finance the business. And it was a very stressful time. Like, it's just, you don't realize how capitally intensive running a consumer packaged good company is. You don't realize all the fees involved in getting into retail. Hiring people is such a challenge because we live in the, at that time we lived in the Bay Area, and like, it's expensive to hire talent.
Where are you now?
So I'm in Southern California now. I'm in San Diego County, less than a mile from the beach. So very different lifestyle.
That sounds amazing, actually.
Yeah, very different lifestyle, but it's, it's expensive. And so I kind of decided, because I had been doing so many things myself, like when you start a business, as it's like, you are HR, you are marketing, you are every manufacturing, everything. Yeah. And so I think I mentally knew that I would break down at some point. And so I decided I needed to like make a change, and I needed to, and if I was going to work this hard anyway, I may as well grow at a more accelerated pace.
Yeah. Yeah. What did the business look like at that point before you were bootstrapping? Like, how many people were there and what were you doing?
Yeah. So I've always had, I had a lot of interns, some great interns, and I had one full-time person, I think, at the time before I raised. And I always hear, and you probably hear this too, is like everyone tells you to hire A+ people, hire the best people you can, the top talent. And it's like, that's a great idea in theory, but the reality of actually being able to afford top tier talent is a different story, especially when you're a startup and bootstrapping. So I knew that, sometimes I had to have what I call Band-Aid roles or Band-Aid solutions for certain roles, and knowing that I needed to just get to one milestone, and that person may not be along for the entire journey, but I just had to get to a certain milestone. And for me, that was, I made about $500,000 in revenue, I think, before I decided to raise money. So we were generating close to $500,000 in revenue.
It's amazing.
So then, the whole process to then raise is a whole nother story. Which,
how hard was it? And what did you, let's tell me about that. Because, it sounds like 3.5 million. Like, how does one even begin to do that? And well, it wasn't all 3.5, right? Like you raised several rounds.
Yeah, several rounds up to that. So the first seed round, I guess you could say, was $500,000, and then we raised another $1 million and 1.4 million. So that first half was just, it's just not an easy process, no matter how you slice it. So I would say in order to raise that first 1.9 that we did, I probably had 80+ meetings, 80+ intros. And then after that, you're pitching, you're refining.
80 for 3, right?
Yeah, truly. It's really a numbers game. And then you're like, okay, then that helps you take rejection a lot better. So it took a while, but also, a lot of it was me learning how to pitch, me learning, like, what does this mean? I read a book called Venture Deals by Brad Feld, which helped me understand the different financing instruments that exist. So I just kind of like self-educated. And then, through another friend of a friend, I learned about, they were known as Excel Foods at the time, which had a more accelerator model of helping emerging food brands really get off the ground. And at that point, I felt I needed that because I didn't know anything about food manufacturing or CPG. So they were one of our first investors to come in, as well as a lot of angels. And I did a lot of pitch competitions and got more exposure in the industry. And met other investors, and then they came on board too. So it was definitely like a multi-prong approach of just, meeting more people, pitching, having all these failed meetings, and then finally, getting
Yeah.
to that first raise.
Is that something we can look at your pitch deck and see how it's done?
Yeah, I mean, you can also see the evolution because
Yeah, I'd love to.
you
Yeah,
might
I'd
see
love
the
to.
first version and be like, "What the heck?
I'd love to
Why did?"
see. That would be great to link to the first version and then to link to the version that actually raised money. I think would be very helpful to people who've never raised money.
Yeah. And so much it's about the pitch deck, but honestly, what people are investing in very early on is you. And I think what was hard for me is I didn't have any track record as an entrepreneur. I didn't even come from like a food consumer packaged good background. I had nothing to my name. I had nothing, like no indicators to say that, hey, this is like a good investment. So I think that was the biggest hurdle in the beginning, to be honest.
So tell us, you got a grant from Tory Burch. How did that come about, right? The Tory Burch Foundation.
Yeah. So I was mentioning how we were doing a ton of pitch competitions, or when I say we, it's like I at the time.
A royal we.
The royal we. So I was doing, I found that was a great way for me to expand my network, to also meet, have the option to even meet investors. And so I started entering them, and I entered one that was in LA called Women Founders Network. We ended up winning first place there, $20,000. Then I learned about the Tory Burch Foundation, which is an amazing organization that Tory Burch, fashion designer and founder of Tory Burch, had created, which is really to help the future of female entrepreneurs. And she had something called the Fellows Program, which was a combination of a pitch competition, but also an intense week-long kind of learning camp. So we ended up it was a national competition. We ended up making the top 50 and then the top 10. And I pitched in front of Tory Burch and her panel, and we ended up winning the $100,000 first place grant. So that was a game-changing moment for me, a very amazing opportunity, surreal moment. And one that still sticks out in my mind as like a true turning point for the business.
Yeah.
Because I think all this time, I would pitch, I would get rejected. I would pitch, I would get rejected. You would hear, oh, this idea, it's great. It's a great novelty product. It's a great, people would call it gimmicky or whatever. Like,
yeah.
So to have that validation that this was actually something that, I don't know, was accepted, and the idea for Tea Drops and the vision for it was received so well.
Yeah.
From people I really respect, was game changing. Obviously, the money was like super helpful, no question. But it's really that change in my mindset too of okay,
this is validation. I also want to hit pause there. You just mentioned casually, oh, I entered these 2 pitch competitions and I won first place. Obviously, you must have done something right compared to other women who pitched. In your mind, what was it about your pitch or your story or you that set you apart? Because obviously you won them, so you did something right there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I thought those were flukes, and then we won this first place for also a PepsiCo Frito-Lay competition last year for $50,000. And I was like, okay, there's something here that I need to revisit of how I do this. And it's like a muscle. Like, I know you've said this on because I've listened to other interviews you have, like, you're an introvert by nature. And I'm the same way. Like, I don't like big crowds. I don't actually like speaking in public. It's very uncomfortable for me. And so I think because of that, I work extra hard to combat a lot of the like mental setbacks and internal setbacks I think I just have related to presentation. So what I found was super helpful was when you made the top 10 at the Women Founders Network pitch competition, you were assigned a pitch coach. They just like gave that as kind of like a service to you, which was really amazing. And I got this pitch coach named Lisa Elia, who truly was, I think, game changing for me in terms of she spent hours with me just refining, like looking at my pitch deck, cutting out things that were just unnecessary. Also the way I pitch, you only have 5 minutes to fit in everything about your business, where you are, your traction to date, where you're headed, how much you're raising. So she eliminated a lot of filler words that were unnecessary. And also she would film me. She would like set a camera up, film me pitch, look at all of my nervous tics I had, whether it's like how I stand, your certain habits you have that you lean on, which I still have them, but I was very cognizant of them during that time. So I think that really, really helped to refine my pitch, but also get rid of some of the filler words and nervous tics that we all have.
Right. Bad presentation habits. It sounds like very obvious advice. Get a coach, right? Like I studied martial arts for many years, and at one point I had 3 martial arts coaches. That's how crazy it was about the sport. And of course I got very good, but duh, right? Like hey, you want to improve something, you get a coach for it. So I think that advice sounds obvious, but yeah, getting a pitch coach, how to obvious and good advice.
If you can afford it at that point, just film yourself.
Yeah.
Film yourself and have other people watch you that you trust to give you advice. And that's sometimes the hardest thing is like, I hate when people watch me pitch, even like close loved ones, but filming them and maybe having your loved ones watch the filmed version and give you some great pointers.
Yeah.
Would also be helpful.
Okay. How do you get Michelle Obama and Chrissy Teigen to rave about your tea?
The high level answer is try to send your products everywhere possible that you can.
Right.
And have a little
Oprah too, right? And Oprah too.
Yeah. And have a little bit of luck. But the Michelle Obama one was that she was speaking at a conference, and we were going to have a booth at this conference. It was a women's conference. And one of the organizers, I don't know how I knew her, but she kind of came up to us and said, "Hey, do you want to like put a product in for the speaker bags?" And we were like, "Sure, why not? Yeah, let's do it." So I didn't know that like we're going to Michelle Obama, but we included, our bag, we included a nice note, and sent that off. And so months later, I get at our office, in the mail, I get this envelope that says, has a seal like the office of Barack Obama. And it's like one of those things that you think is like a scam, those like too good to be true deals. So I opened it and it was like this really nice thank you letter from her. So that was incredible.
Amazing. That's wow. What a story.
And then the Chrissy Teigen one was honestly because we really thought Chrissy Teigen was gonna like a true brand ambassador that we would love to get. Like we felt she fit with the brand, that where we wanted to head. And so I actually looked into what it would cost for a post from her, like any kind of brand ambassadorship. And I think the starting rate was hundreds of thousands of dollars, like just for anything. So I was like, okay, that's not going to work out. So we ended up sending product every channel we could think of where she might be, just Googling like who her agent was, who, anyone associated with her, and sent this off and just kind of forgot about it. And then 6 months later, Isabella, who runs our social, just running down the hall, super excited. And I saw this tweet with like a video of her opening the box and saying such incredible, amazing things. Like you can't even pay for that type of endorsement.
Yeah.
So
where do you even know how to send it? Like what's, how do you get her address or?
I don't think we sent it to her address. I think we sent it to like, I Instagram stalked. I saw like who her manager was, or like who was tagged in her photos, who might be someone. So we just sent any address we could find.
Oh, very sleuthy. Amazing.
Yeah, I know. That's what you got to do when you don't have resources or money. You gotta.
Well, these are the kind of stories I want to share because they're very, it just shows you the resourcefulness nature of entrepreneurs to get it done.
Yeah.
Leading right into the next question is like, then how do you get the same products in Whole Foods and Neiman Marcus, Costco? What is that? I've never done D2C, so I wouldn't even know where to start.
It's anything, a muscle you learn and you develop and you grow and you make mistakes and you grow more. So I think for us, it's just been, pitching a lot to these different buyers, showing them the online data of like, no, people are buying this. Like, here's the
Yeah.
data to support that. Um, we get rejected a lot too, but
Yep.
I think on the whole, we now have, most of, even though we're in 1,500 retailers, most of our business is actually online on our own website and on Amazon. So we invest a lot more time on the site experience, on really creating, um, for our customer base, so she's majority female and a working mom. We want Tea Drops to really be a self-care first experience for her. And so we worked really hard to create a online experience, a community for her. And that's where we spend most of our time, on that aspect of it. And so naturally, last year we were named Shopify's one of their fastest growing direct to consumer sites brands of the year. And so that has now elevated us in like the visibility for a lot of retailers, because they're like, what is this Tea Drops thing? Like, we were the only food and beverage brand name. So now we have a lot of retailers coming to us to learn more about what we're up to. And that's been great, because it's like we haven't now had to hound on any doors. It's a lot of retailers, now coming to us and learning more about what we offer and wanting to bring that into store.
Yeah. You mentioned, yeah, most of your sales are direct instead of through other retail channels. What are some of the techniques or that have worked in terms of marketing?
There's so many. I would say, it's really a test and learn situation when you do digital marketing on Facebook and on Google. So for anyone starting out, if your ads aren't working in the beginning, don't be discouraged. It takes a little bit of time to figure out that right formula of right content, right target audience, right ad type. And
Yeah.
we started seeing a lot more success when we started changing out our content more frequently. And so when I say content, it's like video content, like how to tea drop, our origin story. Well, some of our best performing ads are just me talking and just telling people about how I got started and what is a tea drop and why, and the why behind the company.
Yeah.
And so content has become such a big piece for us that like we literally have a whole team that all they do is just generate content and videos and influence and like, work with influencers on new content. And so that piece has kind of been the game changing factor for us is realizing the type of content that our customers care about.
Thank you. And as we're kind of approaching our time, if you look back on your journey, would you have done anything different or anything you would have told yourself or lessons learned?
I think because I am more introverted in nature, I spent a lot of time, I think, in isolation. Like I was just working on this idea on my own, or like, going to shows and making it myself. But I really didn't have a founder community. And so that piece, like I knew a lot of people in tech, but I didn't know anyone who was like doing a food business. And so that piece of like actually developing that network, I mean, founders have been more helpful to me than probably any other group, in terms of advice, whether it's investors or other operators. So that was very, I didn't realize like how lonesome I was in that sense of like not having a place to turn to. So developing that founder community early on is something I wish I would have done too.
Yeah. I try to do that. I try to commiserate or commune with other founders. Actually, this podcast is sort of meta like that, and it's an opportunity for us to share. Yeah,
I love that, because I do think it's such a hard journey and path, and you're like always learning something new. You're questioning yourself and like what you did, what you didn't do, and so just to have a sounding board to be like, don't worry about it. Or even if someone doesn't know your space, they still understand what you're facing. So I think that piece is helpful. And that's also leads into kind of the mental health piece that I think is like definitely something I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I think it's so easy if you also want to strive for longevity in doing this, that if you don't consciously make the time to disconnect your identity with this entity, whatever it is, and also like make time for yourself, for your family, for your loved ones, it can be an all-consuming endeavor and never ends, can consume all of you. So So I think that piece also is something that, I've always been conscious of it, but like even paying more and more attention to it early on would have been helpful.
Yeah, I can relate to that. My company, Impeccable, I mean, it even has my name on it, but for the first many years, right, like my identity was just tied to this thing, and as we've grown, I think, and as we've had more leaders and then my identity started to diverge a little bit more. And when that happens, actually, I found that it was a struggle myself where it's like I lost part of my identity because this is, hey, I was doing this before, but now somebody else is doing it. I'm no longer, it or the, it's kind of like a baby in the
Did you feel
beginning.
like you weren't of service anymore, or like what was
Yeah, a little bit. I felt like I wasn't useful anymore, and I had to make my piece of that. It's like I'm no longer. It's kind of like maybe the analogy of like when you're a parent, when they're really young. I mean, you're responsible for their everything, feeding, cleaning up their poop and sleep and everything. Their survival is, their world is you, right? Like, yeah. And then when they start growing up, they have a mind of their own and doing things, and it's kind of different than you, and that's kind of weird. And then they have that opinion of their own, then it starts to diverge from you. Then you kind of realize that, oh, you are not them, and vice versa. And then a little piece kind of, you kind of go through a little struggle there.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and so I think I've always tried to like have that like level-headedness about this, that there might be a point at which, T drops outgrows my skill set even, or, maybe I have a different interest or something there's a whole range of things that can happen. And to have enough like confidence in yourself and also humility to know when is the time to like walk away or try something else, or whatever that next chapter might be.
Right.
But
or just a different role still in the organization, but you're not necessarily the end all be all parent.
Yeah, right? I mean, I hope that time is not anytime soon for me, but I always think about that, that like this is amazing right now. I love it, but there might be a time when the role will change. So
yeah. Well, as we end up, thank you so much. I've learned so much just from this conversation. It's been great to catch up. As I mentioned before, I was watching this journey early on when we were sharing a co-working space, and you drop in, and like you said, you were just kind of off on your own, kind of sitting by yourself, working on this idea. Yeah. And then to kind of see this evolution, this journey, and all the success has been very, very rewarding and inspiring.
Yeah, same with you, Pac. My brother's always mentioning all the amazing things that you're up to and how your team's growing. And
thank you.
It's been pretty amazing to also watch your journey.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's been a good journey. And now it's like, okay, now the company's old enough that, strong enough that I can take the time to pursue things like this, which is a passion of mine, to learn from other entrepreneurs. And that's what I've been wanting to do.
Love that.
Awesome. How can someone get in touch with you? And what promotions do you have for the folks listening?
Yes. So you can find anything T-Drops related at mytdrop.com, and also mytdrop on any social handle, whether that's Instagram, even TikTok.
Really?
Yeah. We had a whole fiasco on TikTok. So you can look it up. And we have a special discount code for listeners today. So if you go to mytdrop.com and enter PEK20 at checkout, you will get 20% off.
That's PEK20. Yeah.
PEK20. And then in terms of new launches, we are launching our new unsweetened line, which is our long-awaited unsweetened version of T-Drops that launches beginning of April, and we'll also be rolling out into Costco and all Southern California locations in the beginning of April as well.
Amazing and very impressive. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.